Before we get into this, I have to say that this has no spoilers for the new Force Awakens movie. Also, a lot of Star Wars trivia is now common knowledge, but if I catch you off guard and you learn something new, leave a like. I'd love to see if I manage to get you. Luke went through several changes. Lucas toyed with the idea of changing him into a woman, after cutting Princess Leia from the script. He also entertained the notion of casting the principal characters as a dwarf. In an earlier screenplay, Skywalker was a 60-year-old general. In the shooting script, he was called Luke Starkiller, but this was changed to Luke Skywalker during production. According to Ahmed Best in a Rolling Stones article, Michael Jackson campaigned for the role of Jar Jar Binks, but George Lucas decided against casting him. At one point, Lucas took Best and Natalie Portman backstage at a concert to introduce Best to Michael Jackson as Jar Jar. After confronting Lucas about this afterwards, Lucas said that Michael wanted to do the part of Jar Jar, however, he wanted to do it in prosthetics and makeup like in the Thriller music video. Lucas, however, wanted Jar Jar to be done with CGI. Best later on went to say, "My guess is ultimately Michael Jackson would have been bigger than the movie, and I don't think he wanted that." The Jabba Palace in Star Wars Episode 6 Return of the Jedi involved 42 extras, 18 principal cast members, 10 puppeteers, 9 mime artists, and 90 crew members, and it took a month to film. The Jabba the Hutt puppet also took Stuart Freeborn's team 3 months to build, cost $500,000 to make, and weighed 2,000 pounds. Plus one famous gold bikini that often wouldn't behave itself. Carrie Fisher refused to use the tit tape, meaning many sequences had to be reshot because of wardrobe malfunctions. Also on the number front, the Death Star 2 in Jedi was 460% larger than the first, destroyed one from A New Hope. One of the early concepts for General Grievous was a small child sitting on a floating chair guided by 2 IG-88 droids from Star Wars Episode 5 The Empire Strikes Back. George Lucas rejected this look as a child would not be taken seriously as the deadliest hand-to-hand fighter the galaxy had seen, which is how he wanted Grievous to be portrayed. Instead, part of the final look for General Grievous's face was inspired by the shape of a bathroom detergent spray nozzle. The sound of General Grievous's coughing is George Lucas's own coughing, after developing a bad cough during production. Lucas had it recorded and used as Grievous's own cough. Mark Hamill held his breath for so long during the trash compactor scene that he broke a blood vessel in his face. Subsequent shots are only from one side. One of the first casting rumours for the alleged Star Wars prequel came from a science fiction magazine called Starblazer. In their summer 1985 issue, they published that Sybil Danning was to possibly portray the sexy witch that seduces Anakin Skywalker to the dark side. In 2012, Sybil confirmed on her Facebook page that the rumour was indeed true, and that many discussions took place at that time. They said the idea of a seductive witch was later dropped and Danning was never cast. Shove a lightsaber in any grown man's hand and they'd immediately transform into a giddy kid. Even Ewan McGregor's not immune. During the lightsaber duels in The Phantom Menace, he made lightsaber sounds that had to be fixed in post-production. Hayden Christensen did the same. By the time Episode 3 rolled around, Lucas had become so reliant on digital effects that the film contained over 2,200 digital effects shots, more than the total contained in Episode 1 and 2. In contrast, A New Hope had just 350 visual effects shots. Somewhat ironically, despite all the effects in Episode 3, it's the only Star Wars film not to receive an Oscar nomination in the Best Visual Effects department. The role of Darth Maul in The Phantom Menace almost went to Benicio del Toro. The actor wasn't happy when Lucas removed most of Maul's lines from the film though, and he dropped out to be replaced by Ray Park. In the end, Maul only speaks 3 lines in the entire film. Originally, the asteroid scene, one of the asteroids was actually a shoe. The rumour is that George Lucas asked the special effects team to redo the scene so many times that they got annoyed, and one of them threw in their shoe. Later remaster versions has said to have corrected this. Another of the asteroids is actually a potato. It appears just as the Millennium Falcon first enters the field. 2 asteroids travel from the top left to the bottom right corner of the screen. Just after the second asteroid leaves the screen, a third one appears in the top left corner. At one point in the scripting process, the Force was a large crystal or galactic holy grail called the KYBER crystal. This idea was used in the 1978 Star Wars novel Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Hanks, son of Oscar winner Tom, and a star of the TV show Roswell at the time, was one of a half-dozen actors shortlisted for the role of Anakin Skywalker. The main reason Hanks, or Paul Walker, Jonathan Brandis, or Ryan Philippe didn't get the part was because Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman were said to have the best chemistry in the screen tests. Hanks, one of the most amiable guys in the business, he said he'd have loved to have been part of the Star Wars films. The battle with Wookiees dates back to the earliest screenplays of Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope. Originally, the Wookiees were supposed to help the rebels conquer the Imperial bunker. This idea was the basis for the Battle of Endor in Star Wars Episode 6 Return of the Jedi. But instead of using Wookiees, George Lucas decided to use a smaller, furry race and call them Ewoks. Strangely, the word Ewok isn't actually mentioned at all in the film. We finally got a Wookiee battle to remember though in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, which featured a young Chewbacca. According to the documentary Empire of Dreams, Steven Spielberg, who is lifelong best friends with George Lucas, was Lucas's first choice to direct, and even though Spielberg would have loved to direct the Star Wars films, he was forced to decline because he is a member of the Directors Guild. Lucas dropped his guild membership over the disagreements about Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. As a result, Lucas hired the relatively unknown, and at the time non-union, Welsh director Richard Marquand. Years later though, the beard did not end up helping on Episode 3. When Lucas realized how massive the film was going to be, he asked Spielberg to help him with certain sequences, including the epic lightsaber duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan. Spielberg went on to make War of the Worlds, having gained invaluable experience with modern-day visual effects. The saga's most repeated line is, "I have a bad feeling about this." It originated in Episode 4, uttered by Luke, before being repeated by Han Solo in Episode 4, then Leia in Episode 5, and C-3PO in Episode 6. The prequels contain the trend with Obi-Wan saying it in Episode 1 and Episode 3, and Anakin in Episode 2. There are a lot of bad feelings in this galaxy, far, far away. There was not a single live-action clone trooper in Star Wars Episode 3. Instead, CGI soldiers were used. During filming on Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, the film went under the working title Blue Harvest in order to keep curious fans from attempting to get on set. That title was of course later on used in Family Guy's loving spoof. Meanwhile, the working title for Episode 2 was, believe it or not, Jar Jar's Big Adventure, which would certainly have put many fans off attempting to infiltrate the film's production. Yoda's appearance was originally designed by British makeup artist Stuart Freeborn, who based Yoda's face partly on his own and partly on Albert Einstein's, and his eyes are supposedly inspired by the latter. George Lucas and the production team apparently had a series of running battles with the studio cleaning service, which would continually clean and buff the floors on set, even though Lucas had requested that they leave them scuffed and dull. Part of his idea was that the world the characters inhabited should look lived in. After the sets were constructed, George Lucas went through them and had every single one of them dirted up. The R2-D2s were all rolled in the dirt, nicked with a saw, and kicked about a bit. George Lucas popularized the concept of giving sets, props, etc. a dirted up appearance to create the illusion that they were old and worn. On the first day of filming in the deserts of Tunisia, the country experienced its first major rainstorm in 50 years. Can you picture what Chewbacca would have looked like if he had been clothed? That's almost what happened, according to Mark Hamill. The actor has said that studio execs weren't happy about the fact that Chewie is essentially naked for the entirety of A New Hope, and attempted to get his costume redesigned with shorts. Needless to say, that never happened. Perhaps realizing how much of a hated figure Jar Jar has become after The Phantom Menace, Lucas made the surprising astute decision to make him into a subtle villain in Episode 2. While he's standing in for Senator Amidala, it's Jar Jar's suggestion that Palpatine be given supreme powers, which the soon-to-be Emperor uses for great evil. Jar Jar then could be held responsible for indirectly causing the fall of the Old Republic and the destruction of the Jedi's. Typical. Peter Mayhew and David Prowse were both given a choice as to which giant character they wanted to play, Chewbacca or Darth Vader. Mayhew wanted to play a good guy and Prowse wanted to play a bad guy, so they ended up playing the matching characters. The fight between Yoda and Dooku was envisioned quite differently. Originally, Yoda was to come in and immediately have the fight with Dooku, but many of the creative team felt that was too quick a transition for Yoda, and the audience needed to feel the power of good and evil going against each other. So George Lucas added in the preamble to the fight with the blue lightning and rock falls, because it showed how powerful Yoda was. The lightsaber battle was a culmination of all that energy. There was also footage shot of Dooku using either Obi-Wan's or Anakin's lightsaber, in addition to his own against Yoda, but these moves did not make the final cut. Alec Guinness, the actor who played Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original trilogy, thought of the Star Wars films as fairy tale rubbish. Despite this, he negotiated a deal to earn 2% of the gross box office receipts for the movies he appeared in, earning him over $95 million due to the overwhelming success. Harrison Ford was paid just $10,000 for his performance in Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. George Lucas's plundering of non-English languages for names is legendary. On top of pinching the Dutch word for father for Darth Vader, he also used the Sanskrit word for warrior to name Yoda. As for Jar Jar, that name was created by George Lucas's son. Meanwhile, John Williams turned to a 13th century Welsh manuscript for the chanting of his composition, Duel of the Fates. He translated the lines, "Under the tongue root a fight most dread, and another raging behind in the head," into Sanskrit. Harrison Ford coined a phrase that stuck when he found himself struggling with Lucas's dialogue on A New Hope. Frustrated, he raged, "George, you could type this, but you can't say it." It's a quote that's been attributed to both Ford and Carrie Fisher. Though we could buy either of them saying it, according to Anthony Daniels, it was Ford who voiced what everyone else was feeling on set. The droid factory chase sequence was not in the original script. Anakin and Padme were originally captured as soon as they arrived on Geonosis. George Lucas wrote an additional action sequence based in the droid factory to lead up to their capture that was filmed in March 2001. Ben Burtt experimented with using drum beats and percussion sounds to underscore the droid factory sequence. George Lucas then told him to put in traditional effects. During the final battle, nearly 90% of the music heard is temp tracked from John Williams' score of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. This is most likely because, like the droid factory sequence, the clone battle was a late addition to the film. According to Ben Burtt, the sounds Chewbacca makes were crafted from a compilation of large mammals, mostly bears. He said one particular zoo kept a grizzly bear and was an invaluable source of Chewbacca's sounds. R2-D2 sounds are various people, mostly Bert, making baby-like sounds or recordings of real-life babies electronically manipulated. R2-D2's vocal patterns largely contain sound designer Ben Burtt's own voice in trying to create the beeping. Whistling noises from the droid, Burt found that he was vocalizing a lot of what he was trying to achieve, so he recorded his voice, mainly making baby noises, and then fed it through a synthesizer. While speaking at London's National Film Theatre in 2009, Ben Burtt disclosed that the alien gibberish sprouted by the Mos Eisley spy Garindan Longsnoot was actually the processed voice of John Wayne. The lightsaber sound effect is a combination of the hum of an idling 35mm movie projector and the feedback generated by passing a stripped microphone cable by a television. At one point, George Lucas had planned the character of Han Solo to be a huge, green-skinned monster with gills and no nose. Then Lucas changed the idea of Han Solo to a black human. He auditioned several black actors and even musicians, including Billy D. Williams, until finally settling on Glyn Turman. But after this, he decided to make the role white. Kurt Russell, Nick Nolte, Christopher Walken, Jack Nicholson, Al Pacino, Chevy Chase, Steve Martin, Bill Murray, Robert Englund, Sylvester Stallone, John Travolta, and Perry King were all candidates for the role of Han Solo. George Lucas also wanted to stay away from any actors he had previously used in his films. James Caan, Jack Nicholson, Rob De Niro, and Burt Reynolds turned down the role. Harrison Ford, who had played Bob Falter in Lucas's American Graffiti, read the part of Han Solo for screen tests of other characters, but wasn't originally considered for the part. During these tests, Lucas realized Ford was perfect for the role. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this week's list, and if you want to see more, click here for my top 10 disturbing Fallout Vault-Tec experiments. It's disturbing what they did in those games. And if you want to see a different one, click here for my 5 Pokemon based on mythological creatures, where we delve into some of the hidden origins of some of the more interesting Pokemon.